Hello, Namaste, Salam, Sat Sri Akal, Adab, Kaim Chho. How are you doing, audience? Today, we have a very important topic that we are going to discuss the budget that was presented by the Finance Minister on the 1st of February for 2021-2022. Many are saying that the budget is a historic moment in any FMC speech, given that we are coming from a pandemic times. It made the task much more difficult for everybody else. And in that context, this budget comes out, which some are hailing as one of the dream budgets of all time, whereas there are, of course, many criticisms on how the budget has been formed and how it could have been better. Now, to discuss on this complex, we have two very significant personalities who have been tracking the economy for long and have been part of the business sector for a very, very long time. I'd like to introduce my guest today to you. Our first guest today is Mr. R.K. Anand. He was a former chief economist with Punjab National Bank. Currently, he works as an advisor with eGrow Foundation and is also a faculty at various top management institutes. Welcome to the episode, Anand sir.
Thank you very much, Sayam, for inviting me over your event today.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
Thank you so much. We also have with us Mr. Rajendra Ganatra. He was MD and CEO of SME India Asset Reconstruction Company and is presently an independent consultant for insolvency. We welcome you to the episode, sir. How are you?
Thank you very much, Sanyam, for inviting here. We'll try to do the best for you.
Thank you so much, sir. We are really looking forward to your opinions, and we'll start off. First, we'll ask the question. We'll go to Anand sir, and we'll want to ask you the question about what the economic survey held when the economic survey came out. So, what were the directions that the economic survey gave, and also about the financial stability report that was published by Reserve Bank of India as a background to the budget.
Thank you very much, Sayam, to offer me for putting a background with the two latest reports available very shortly. I should say within a span of about 10 to 12 days, these two reports. And these are the very first most awaited public documents which all the stakeholders were waiting to know the reality of the markets, the reality of the economic indicators, especially after the post this pandemic. I should not say post because it is still continuing, but post this attack, which in our country got institutionalized by the lockdowns in the month of March onwards. So the first starting with economic survey, which normally is the report always made available uh, before the budget. This year, this economic survey has brought already the background which we have found caught in the budget, that economic survey indicated the continued expansionary fiscal path to be maintained by the government, which gave the indications that most likely, in all probabilities, the budget will be ending up with a very high fiscal deficit. They had predicted, not predicted, rather a forecast by them that we will be out of this, pre-COVID level, close to that. This will be taking around a period of 2 years. And the recovery also, they proved for India having done a very fine job in the management of the pandemic, that the planners, the economists there in the economic survey team under the chief economic advisor and the principal economic advisor to the government of India, they saw the recovery happening in India is V-shaped, where they saw the Q2 is taking the path up in a shape of V, which has been pulled down by Q1. So this was a significant finding there. And with this apprehensions in the mind, they were anticipating that, the high fiscal deficit and the high debt which they are going to project in the economic survey may bring some apprehensions in the market. So they tried to explain that this spending will be mostly in the capital expenditure sector, and from there the income will rise, and the rise in income will take care of rising debt to GDP ratio. So that is the guidance by the economic survey going forward. And they have seen the recovery coming in India from the certain indicators like increase in power demand, increase in the steel demand, e-way bills, GST rising. So that is the thing, they noted by them, and they will be taking it further into the FRMB, all these things. They survey set its eye on need to watch the inflation, farm regulations, and the loosening of the over-regulated areas of the government and entering into less regulations. So indirectly, they were indicating at the privatization sort of thing, or disinvestment, I should say, not privatization directly. So that was indicated, and healthcare, research and development, these areas were indicated in this year economic survey. And going forward, they had given a economic path also to India of emulating a very small country close to us that is almost equal to a state of India, that is Bangladesh, drawing the lesson from there that how Bangladesh, with a very small economy, is in a position to have advantage in exports. So based on the relative cost advantage or their competitive advantage, Bangladesh economy is concentrating only on those goods and services in which they have the competitive advantage. So that model was suggested to India, and India was shown that the Bangladesh exports have risen by 8.6%, and India could end up only with a 0.9%, with the result that India is focusing on those items in which there is no competitive advantage to India. So that is the lesson. So this report talks of supply side push, infrastructure push, manufacturing sector push, then the demand getting generated out of the government consumption, the demand getting generated out of the pent up demand in the private sector. And with all this, they had given almost a scenario that the budget will be ending up in a negative territory, that is a very high fiscal deficit compared to what we have seen in the earlier years. And the numbers are before us, we will be talking during the course. Now, shifting from economy to the other area you want me to ask is the financial stability report. The financial stability report is the document which comes from Reserve Bank of India. This had brought again a scenario in which they confirmed, like economic survey, the prior to economic survey, they confirmed that India had been going good in tackling the COVID-19, this shock, and gradually the economy is coming up and showing a positive outlook on the vaccine developments that has been brought by the governor there in the FSR. Then the positive news about the bank credit, which had remained subdued throughout, started moving up. So this indication was confirmed by them. Then they also expressed satisfaction that banks, despite all this apprehensions in their mind of the public, were able to improve their capital to risk assets ratio during this period. And they said it that in numbers, for the scheduled commercial banks, this has improved to 15.8. This is a positive indicator. Then the provisions for the non-performing loans, the provision coverage ratio of the banks is narrated there in this report. has improved and increased from a level of 66.2% to 72.4%, which is a sign which has been taken as a confidence building measure for the investors in the market. But at the same time, financial stability report indicated that now, since this is a sort of stress testing document in which they present the three scenarios: the base case, moderate case, and the worst case. So the financial stability report gave a first-hand understanding of them about the growing non-performing advances in the economy, since India is being talked with already a very high level at 7.5 in the September 20, which they said may increase to 13.5% in September 21. And this is a base case. But if they take worst case scenario into the impact, then they had talked of the NPA level likely to rise at 14.8% in a very severe stress scenario. And it is known about the financial stability report that these are the stress tests conducted by in terms of the risk management for the Indian banking system in the financial stability report. And we have been users of this report throughout. So with this, the risks to the banking system in India, which are being talked in the market, has been guided on the street as experts and the analysts and the persons like us have found in the past that the estimates given by Reserve Bank of India are generally beaten in the reality. By beaten, I mean that what they indicate to the economy, normally the actuals have come lower than that. So the Reserve Bank of India levels of this 13.7 or the 14.8 are taken as a market that now with the economic recovery in sight and V-shaped recovery being talked of, and another V vaccine available. So market is expecting that banks will be able to cope up the situation by improved cash flows going forward. But right now that has not happened. This is a risk factor. So this needs to be continuously watched. So this is how these two documents set the background, and we can talk more when I come back again.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to Rajendra, sir. Sir, what is your input on the state of Indian economy last year with respect to Atmanirbhar Bharat, employment, and other things?
When you're talking of the state of economy, of course, we're talking of the financial position of any country. Broadly speaking, if I were to say, I would compare a country with a company, where a company is in a good financial position as long as it's having a profit after tax with cash flow. And if it's not having profit after tax, yet it has some other income which makes for the deficit, and it has cash flow, that's good. If I look at a country, I would look at 2 to 3 parameters. I would look at its trade surplus or deficit. If there is a deficit, it means it's akin to a loss, right? And if there is a way of funding that loss, how can that be? That can be by way of remittances, of course, like other income in another company. It can be for a short period. And even if there is a difficulty, then there has to be investments, FDI or FII, right? Ultimately, if we are spending more than what we are producing, it has to be funded. So that's where we are coming up with an ultimate figure of fiscal deficit. And there's a correlation between fiscal deficit and your trade deficit. So coming to that, if I look at, we have a very huge jump in fiscal 2021, a fiscal deficit of 15.1 lakh crore. And that happened because, of course, shortfall in the disinvestment receipts and even the tax collections, which themselves were pegged very high last year. So that's where we are. And the private sector, why it could not, spurt, enhance investment has been for two reasons. One, of course, the pandemic had its own impact, but let's face it very clearly. We have the Sensex all 30 or pick up the Nifty 100. Barring some of the very successful companies who are, kind of zero debt. If you look at Bajaj Auto or HUL, they have hardly any debt, but they don't have much of appetite for debt. They are able to grow with the internal funding. But others who like to have debt have not been able to garner first more because of their inability to, the capacity was gone. If you look at the redoubtable RIL, what was it? It was 4.22 lakh crore of that outstanding as on 31st March 2020. Now, and that worked out to a debt to EBITDA ratio of little less than 4, which meant that RIL had, its debt as much as, it could be serviced. But that was a very smart move of that. It was leveraging its own earnings for investing in high value projects like Jio and others. I'm just digressing to make a point, right? Which were eventually, one of those companies was disinvested to the extent of 25%, and a substantial 1.5 lakh crore was brought in to bring down a significant debt amount. Well, that was done. But for that, the disinvestment was done. There was no further investment. There is no further investment because the debt capacity has been low, right? So that's how we suffered a substantial, not just a fiscal deficit, but also the employment issues came up. Large number of power projects also went sick. They were reported to IBC. This is the state of economy. It was put on turbocharge, somebody said. Why? A high fiscal deficit at 9.5%. So there's been an honesty as I was mentioning. Yes, this is the deficit, but wait, it is not merely of the revenue expenditure, right? Actually, the revenue expenditure is expected to ease by 2.7% to 29.3 lakh crore, right? And the gross capital expenditure is going to rise by a very substantial 26.2% to 5.5 lakh crore in this year, from 4.4 lakh crore in the revised estimate of financial year 2021, right? And that's what matters very substantially, right? And this is where, of course, this transport highways is going to pick up a substantial amount, as well as the National Bank for Financing Infrastructure Development. So essentially the focus is on infrastructure, which gives a very steady returns. See, when the government is planning an investment, it has got to be in something of this kind, infrastructure which deals with public goods, where there's a regulation to blend the efficiency of the power sector and the public-private partnership and guarantee good deal to the consumers. And this is perpetual project. It may be for management under a BOT or BOOT, whichever structure a PP. It ensures that for it enhances your overall capital output ratio, incremental capital output ratios. That's where we are. So I have two things. One, the state of economy has been precarious for reasons beyond the control of the government, but the government has stood fast on that. It has managed it. Now it wants to turbocharge the economy with a substantial investment. The challenges are two. One, to maintain a very competitive incremental capital output ratio, and two, to ensure that the overall capital output ratio becomes competitive vis-a-vis others. And that would mean that we stop leakages from the economy. And to do that, there will have to be absolute transparency in implementing these expenditure programs, right? The second challenge that you face is that the fiscal deficit must come around to around 4.5%, less than 5% in the next 5 years. That is by the fiscal 2026. And this, I would repeat, entails a very effective implementation, which has so far not been the case most of these years. So this was my observation on the state of economy and going forwards. I do not have the figures on the impact on the employment that it has, but the employment has suffered a lot. I can only say that the capex which the government is proposing will indeed enhance employment, because infrastructure sector is not only a sector which gives you steady output, but it also ensures employment right from the project implementation through the operations.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for providing us a brief uh, state of the Indian economy reports of sorts, which was very blunt as you always do. Now, one of the ideas Anand sir said that I would not use the word privatization, but rather disinvestment when he was making his remarks. But I think out and out in the in the economic commentary that we have been reading over the days, it is said that finally the government has accepted that privatization is the way to go. So, Anand sir, we want to have your opinion on what do you think are possible sectors or entities that will get privatized? Also, why is there a need and what are the benefits that will accrue to Indian economy with the help of privatization? And with that, I would also like to put in the point that government has also proposed leasing of its government land. So, what do you think about it in respect to privatization?
The term divestment so far needs to be seen as the things go for implementation. So the larger details will be available to us in the plan of the implementation. And such big, ambitious program of divestment really wants its success to seen only in the steps of execution only. So why it is not directly the privatization is one case of privatizing two banks and one insurance company is privatization. Rest of the areas where the government may bring its stake down in their public sector policy, maybe that allowing entry to even retail investors like you and me when those units go tapping the capital market. Some of the institutions may be eligible to apply for the ownership now to be sought, and the foreign direct investments or the foreign investors, the area may be open to them to have that. So clearly, the public sector stake is to come down, and in their document now, as from our student life to till about 4 years ago, we have seen the Indian economic planning model to be a mixed economy, where public sector is even said by the planners as the big brother. So now there is a directional change suggested that the going forward, doing business is not the business of government. So minimum government, more governance, Atmanirbharta, all these things are driver to this plan of the divestment, which has to be read. Four strategic sectors, space, etc., transport, telecom, power, petroleum as a third area, and fourth area is BFSI, where they want the presence of state-run companies to be the minimum. Capital expenditure or the deficit-led capital expenditure, the revenues are seen coming from non-tax resources, that is the areas like asset monetization and the divestment. Thus, of the previous year's divestment programs not getting fully implemented. For implementing, taking a lot of transparency which the government wants to bring in, that itself takes a very long time to come. But still, now coming to the philosophy of this privatization, tips we used to count on the up to now, like high deficit, low efficiency, low productivity, and the capital output ratios, and the issues of governance, etc. Now these things are is to be put in a manner with the listed companies where the government stake is either not there or very less. So they are bound by the regulations of SEBI. There will be the declarations, disclosures, adherence to the discipline of the market, exposed to the competition of the market. So all this is going to set up an area of competition, which itself is a mother of generating so many benefits for the consumer and efficiency in the governance itself. Because if you don't govern, if you don't deliver, you don't get capital. Because capital is one resource which I can confidently say is the most difficult resource. If you don't perform, you can't get even 1 rupee from the market. So that is now to be raised by themselves. So the performance and the competition is definitely seen. So these are the benefits, and the government deficit gets reduced. That is the indirect benefit to the government, because now the land leasing is sort of the adopted by the sovereigns when your normal conventional source of revenues are not earning, and tax revenue, there is no scope to increase. So in a situation like this, when the world is coming out of this pandemic, and many those who could not do this will go deep into the debt non-discharge and default. So to save you that, a deficit-led capital expenditure model aiming at change in the ownership is there, which is a directional change, we should say. And this comes into a category of reform, which is to be seen in implementation. And many stakeholders have to be educated and taken into confidence about the intentions of doing so. So I think these things are the things now which ultimately, if executed, it's a very big if executed in letter and spirit and well in time only, then only this the funding of the deficit can be done in a time bound manner. Otherwise, normally these things get delayed. When you read it in a separate document of the reforms, these programs, you will probably count for a timeline. The latest documents and the approach of the government is to kickstart towards this model, which they may, if not achieved by FY, say March 22, may be achieved measure. And the institutions are proposed to come in between, like the credit to the manufacturing sector or the corporates to be afforded by now the new institution, which is talked of, DFI. We'll be talking on that, the Development Finance Institution, which was a missing piece in the Indian financial market. So all these are the philosophy profits of the projected profits of the new approach, which you call privatization. We take it a little humble, that an approach of divestment may lead to some of the parts into the privatization, and the rest, if it comes to the retail investors, that part is always welcome, But it's a long way now to see the things in execution. So that is one word I will mark in bold, that execution, the government majority in the political strength with them, their strong will and intention, all are there with them. So if it is executed that way, I think we will get over to a new areas, which will now make a scope for development of debt market, scope of development of the financial market at its own, without the handholding of the government. So that is my take on the concept you asked. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Rajendra sir, amid all this protest going on farm laws around the country and majorly in Delhi, we want to talk about what is the agricultural allocation of budget this year, and what are the schemes related to it in the past for acting now.
Thank you very much. So here again, we have better allocation than last year, of course. 16.5 lakh crore from the earlier 15 lakh crore, that's a good 10%. And I will not go into these 3 laws which have created controversy. I'm absolutely certain these will be resolved also. It takes time for the people to come around to accepting new things if they perceive uncertainties. So that will happen. But I can see that the proposals which are contained for the agriculture this time are as a continuity of the reform process. 1,000 mandis to be connected with ENAM network with rising trade value and increasing market efficiency. Now, this will also, ensure that there is more of B2C happening or B2B happening online, and that will aid the farmers very substantially. Budgetary allocation for crop insurance is again increased modestly from 15,307 crore to 16,000 crore, and that is going to definitely aid the small farmers. The focus seems to be on the small farmer who often, gets thrown away because of the force majeure. This is another good thing. Again, the interest subsidy for farm credit is little lower and than the previous years. That's 19,468 crore instead of 19,832 crore. But I'm sure this is based on a work which has been done. Often these figures, you have a time series analysis, and it's not that there was something wrong with this, that this was decreased, but this seems to be the need. It's a need-based allocation, and it happens to be just a marginal decrease. The allocation to the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, that is PMKSY popularly called, there's a substantial jump here from 7,950 crore, 54 crore to 11,586 crore. Similarly, allocation to the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi Yojana, it's a bit down, but again, this is need-based. Again, 75,000 crore previously to 65,000 crore. These are the estimates, and we know that estimates and actuals always differ. So as I would see here, if the PM Kisan, requirement goes up, there will be definitely adjustment upwards, right? If the PM Kisan Sinchai Yojana again sees a difference, there will be differences. So I have no doubt about this. The only thing is, this is being very nicely funded by the levy of agriculture and infrastructure and development cess on petrol, diesel, and fertilizer, among other items. And the good thing is that even with that, with the reduction in excise duty, the inputs, the diesel and petrol, in fact, stay intact based on the current state of the crude pricing. So it doesn't lead to inflation. So that's how it is. And in a sense, one could say that this is a continuation of the past with emphasis added and emphasis redefined, as I just mentioned. It has done a bit of a protection for the farmers, and that is by raising custom duty to 10% from the nil earlier. And another thing is that it's increased the allocation for micro irrigation specifically under the PMKSY, right? So though it has come down, as I said, it can be restated and it can, grow. I would have loved one more thing here. Let me just add, when I visited for 5 days, I went to Israel. I also met with their agricultural extension center and the farmers, two farmers, the farmer couple I met. I must tell you, the agricultural extension center gives three kinds of helps to the farmers. One, it does enormous amount of agricultural technology development, and it gives the best of the seeds. It does a lot on the agriculture engineering, where even you can harvest things like olive. I would bet that they would even harvest things like fruits which will simply fall and get destroyed, right? That's what they do it. The third thing that they do is that when they give the engineering, they also help implement. Now, if we have such agricultural extension centers, it would help a lot. My second experience was that, and when I met the farmer couple, both of them were doctorates in the agriculture, and they were developing exquisite varieties of flowers. They had crossed 80, and at that point of time, they wanted to exit the business, and their estimated realization was about $15 million. Of course, my agenda was not to buy that, but my agenda was to raise venture capital funding for an Indo-Israel fund. So I did keep a track, and eventually he exited with $20 million. But that's not the point. The point is that at that point of time, in his farm, the water and the fertilizer feeding was controlled through the computers, and also the greenhouse was movable and it was moving consistent with the sun rays that you have. For example, you must have seen that in solar power, the focus has to be the solar panel must shift in order to capture the solar rays. Similarly, this was done here, which minimized the water requirement, which optimized the fertilizer requirement, and as a result, it did not deteriorate. It did not affect adversely the total dissolved solid contents in the water there, which we are facing in this country because of profligate use of fertilizer. I wish that something of that kind comes, but I think this being a continuation someday very soon, that will also happen. Overall, if I see this is a thumbs up for the agriculture. Once the controversy on the new law dies down, these proposals will gel very well with them, and I do hope that the implementation will be very efficient. In other words, the input which is given will lead to the physical output which is commensurate with the fund spent. That's all about the agriculture, my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think
Thank you.
the idea that you have given that we can borrow something from Isaiah, I think when the time is due, it should definitely be borrowed. Now, moving forward, fiscal deficit is one of the most talked things that has come out, and even in this discussion, you have mentioned it. So, Anand sir, I want to have your views on three things related to fiscal deficit. One is the transparency that has been employed by the government. Second is the fiscal glide path that the government proposed, I think through the economic survey, if I'm not wrong. And third is how the credit rating agencies have reacted or could react given the high fiscal deficit that we have.
Yeah. So the last question first. Rating agencies normally, they will follow what is told by the first of them. In my career, I have seen the rating industry normally follows the rating first announced by any big four. So it's a sort of the group as a whole. I have seen they have not differed from each other much. The second thing is the government has, although the fiscal deficit is big and big borrowing program is there, the government has resorted to transparency of the numbers, which has been appreciated by the market, bringing every number even off budget on the budget and working out a clear mathematics of the fiscal deficit. Then with a low debt to GDP ratio. And third, the plan of implementation as they have strongly resolved. And fourth, the recovery of the Indian economy now promising slightly better than many of the advanced countries to start early and less impacted by the pandemic with their approach of management of the pandemic. All this generates a hope of that now the GDP quarterly has come to a positive territory. And going forward, the government has resolved that they are going to glide the path of this fiscal deficit in a very gradual manner, and they have given a timeline up to FY25 to remain at a higher level and come back to the conventional level by FY26. So a long path has been shown by the government of their model. Now, is this the only worry to the rating companies should have been the, when they come with their new ratings, that one is the capacity of the government to perform and execute. Second is, if our debt to GDP ratio would have been much higher, if even many economies with the very high debt GDP compared to us have been rated better, and our sovereign always saying that we are the fifth largest and getting rated to a grade slightly above the junk grade. So even one notch down is taken, that grade can put us in a very tight spot in the eyes of the investors. But now with the excess liquidity, domestic and the global, and route already to India in the current quarter seen, I think early indications from the rating agencies are not negative. Although no press, no where it is mentioned by them, but with the interaction with the policy planners and the market, what sense we are getting from the market, which is just the unconfirmed so far, that the ratings may for the India are not likely to be downgraded based upon this approach of the economic development, because the economy itself is in the transformation, and there many sectors have returned back to the positive output, and the banking system, the financial system is put to address now the risks by creation of some of the institutions like Bad Bank and DFI, which can just bring down the temperature on the balance sheets of the banks in India by taking out the stressed assets to the path of their resolution or disposal by a very independent, transparent method which they are thinking of under the institutional system. And all this going forward with the governance in the place right now in our country, the rating agencies are seen as not downgrading us from here. So they may keep us on watch, may come up with some commentary in their rating reports that if this parameter deteriorates in financial year by Q1, Q2 or H1, then the rating is likely to be like that. This is normally their style internationally, I know. And I'm very strong in saying that one company follows the other, because I have personally experienced while getting the financial institutions rated with them and interactions with them with their very high level of the people, those who come for the rating. So, sometimes companies resort to debt. Now the country is resorting to debt route for raising the income. The income increase itself, if it is, good, then this debt can be served, or this debt to GDP ratio has the potential to go down automatically by increase in the denominator.
Thank you, sir. Rajendra sir, the next question I have from you is, as Anand sir talked about capital expenditure, we see that in this current budget, there is a significant increase in capital expenditure. So what is your view on as to capital expenditure is better off than revenue expenditure for the country? And what the second question would be, what would be its multiplier effect on Indian economy?
Right. Of course, there's no gainsaying in the fact that capex is better than revenue expenditure, because capex has a significant multiplier and RBI documents it regularly. So that's a fact of life. The good thing is that it's a big jump, and allocations for the transportation highway sector, 1.1 lakh crores approximately, about 3.3 lakh crores for the power sector, etc., etc. This is how it is. We are all aware of it. The devil lies in the details, in the implementation, how these are implemented. Now, if you look at, let's say, road sector, what had happened earlier and what is going to happen now, and let's see what good has happened here. We had, we began with first project was a small project, which was Udaipur Bypass Road project. It was a runaway success, if you look at the transportation sector. And then, of course, there were many, and by that time, it was very clear that all the road projects which were unclogging the roads, which were bypass projects, were very sound. And then everyone jumped into it. Not just the construction companies, but even other dynamic developers. Not just somebody like GDK, who was a construction guy, but even GMR, who was not a construction guy. And if you remember, even GMR came about with costs which were very competitive, despite an EPC project given to outsider. But this got deteriorated. And what had happened was that, and that's a fact of life, it's a documented fact. What happened was that every developer, every construction major who grabbed the road project, or even if he was not a construction major, when he grabbed the project through competitive bidding, he came up with a project cost which suited him, right? And he manufactured equity out of it and more of it. You might say that, look, this is a very big allegation. If you look at the study conducted by, instituted by NHAI for 66 project, it was seen that the debt that was sanctioned by the Indian lenders was 1.39 times the cost of the project estimated by NHAI itself. Now, granted that the NHAI's cost of the project was hard cost, Whereas when the lenders give money, they also add the soft cost and the interest during construction, which may be as high as 7 to 8 to even 10%, depending on the kind of the leveraging, right? Yet it was very high. And what was the result? The result was that many companies fell sick. Those who went into operations fell sick because they had a lot of debt, and they had, again, it's a known fact that whenever a sponsor gives a traffic study to the lenders, there is a significant estimation bias. International studies exist which show that there's an estimation bias, and the lender has to be very careful about it. How the lenders tackled is not the subject here, but the fact is that this led to projects where the promoters continued to prosper, notwithstanding the deleterious impact of the excess debt on the projects. Added to that, there were significant delays in the environmental approvals, which caused even the established players to withdraw from the projects. Now you find that there is an emphasis on guaranteeing land availability. That's one thing. And the good thing is that the Honorable Minister Nitin Gadkari has been very dynamic, and the hybrid annuity mechanism has ensured that this sector will keep on prospering. So that's about the allocation in highway structures. Coming to the power, the good news is that now the distribution is also going to be freed, right? The whole thing is how it's going to be implemented. Now, there are two types of problems which we are faced here. If you look at the UMPP, in UMPP, there were some projects where, somebody won the project, but eventually withdrew, allowed the, the performance guarantee to be invoked rather than launch the project. In another project, let's talk about, let's say, Sasan project. The Reliance Group had quoted 1.27 paisa per unit. The other fellow who had disqualified, the L1 bidder, had quoted 1.19. Then the L2 had to meet that 1.19, and today that's also getting sick. So when we was absolutely robust structure, which induced significant transparencies, and everyone won it. But even World Bank does not press the L2 fellow to meet the L1, which was done here. That was wrong. The L2 fellow stooping, despite the unviability, was also wrong. So there cannot be the bidding should ensure 2 to 3 things. One, there should be no winner's curse allowed. That's one thing. There should be absolute transparency. Let me say that the other biddings for the power projects are not very transparent. In fact, there is always some kind of cartelization which happens. The implementation would be the key, definitely, which is a repetition, but the implementation will have to work in a way that there is an ecosystem where the government also does its part. The failure of our PPP has been because of the government failing in its part in various ways. The bureaucrats are not held accountable. This will have to change. The government will have to make a very affirmative statement by having a state support guarantee. That's one thing. Once that happens, the promoters would not, mind taking a commercial risk. Right now, the promoters do not just take commercial risks, but they also take political risk of, say, a letter of assurance for supply of coal not materializing. And when he takes that risk, he does not park with it himself. He passes on to the lender. Our government has done something to ensure that the land availability is there, but it will have to make sure that there are no moral hazards allowed. The transparency is there in allocation of the project, and the government should be steadfast. Once the government makes a commitment, it must be honored. If the letter of assurance is given, let the lender also wait for the letter of assurance to turn into a bankable fuel supply agreement. If I take the power sector example, so that once that is clear, the promoters would also come up with lower cost, not just the UMPP. If you were to probe the competitive bidding adopted by Andhra Pradesh in late 90s, it had led to the lowest project cost for the combined cycle power project. So we have the example. The whole world knows it. Now somebody has to come, clobber up these facts, come up with a very robust system of allocating the projects and go about it replicate this experiment in all the infrastructure sectors. Otherwise, we are going to remain high cost economies. The infrastructure allocation can really lead to turbocharging of this. The you know proper transaction advisors adopting the most transparent processes with an affirmative structure of the governments doing their own part has to be there. India will never look back thereafter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajen sir, for explaining it so well to us. And my next question would be from RK Anand sir. Sir, we see that there's a focus on long-term finances in this budget. And for it, they have planned development financial institutes. So we would like to ask, what is the objective of this DFI and its funding procedure? Also, the impact it will have on our Indian economy.
The scheme of DFI is sort of reversal of the system which was earlier there in Indian economy, that the DFIs were there, and the names like ICICI, HDF, this IDBI, all these were the term lending institutions. In conceptually you can call them the DFIs, taking care of long term and the large amounts required for financing for the infrastructure. But with at that time the institutions not to resources to the need of the projects in the way like Jindal sir was talking about the time overrun and the cost overrun. The things like that had challenged their efficiency, and we practiced the concept reverse merger in our economy, that the larger institutions became small by, if you convert the bigger ICICI into a retail bank, that is the ICICI bank, and then start doing retail and wholesale both on the same balance sheet. That is the reversal of this thing, because projects running through many time cycles were getting financed by the scheduled commercial banks on their balance sheet, which have the tap to their resources coming from the savers, like the retail savers are there in the market, or the persons like senior citizens with their savings put in the fixed deposit, and then with these short term resources the projects long term were getting financed, and this was setting up a asset liability mismatch in terms of the duration of the loans, pricing of the loans, and the risks upon the liabilities and assets in the balance sheet. Like the liability payment is certain, this will happen as on a particular date, and the depositor will come even prior to that, withdrawing prematurely. But when you finance a long-term project, it has to pass through 4 or 5 economic cycles. Then the repayment of that is not certain, rather it is uncertain to happen, and the time overrun, cost overrun will make the first the liquidity tight in a commercial bank, and then this liquidity risk upon that bank getting managed or mitigated by resorting to the ultra short-term liquidity need at high cost. And later on, if the liquidity risk remains for a longer period, the market starts taking it as a solvency risk. So it has happened with the financial institutions for the past 2-3 years you have seen. So to now remove this anomaly, the institutions of the term lending institutions with expertise in the project finance are now have thought to be put back as DFIs, development financial institutions, those who will take care of the infra projects. So this will go out of the balance sheet of the commercial bank, and the commercial bank will be more resorted to their segment of the small funding needs or the medium term funding needs of the corporates, or the at least say large companies, not for the purpose of infra but for the purpose of manufacturing or services or trading, whatever it is. So this is a good step, which is a sound practice of risk management, due date which is certain, and the network is threatened. So this is a good step, and in fact this was being asked by the financial institutions themselves over a long period to the governments, and the present government has heard it and brought it into the system. So this is a welcome move. And now they will be having their own funding plans from the long-term resources, tapping the pension funds, universities fund, the tapping of the bond market with their ratings. So enough liquidity is there, enough investors are available across the globe, those who are ready to put in their money, provided you have a very clear picture of the project finance with you and a very clear sense of your expertise to do that thing. And with the track record of this DFI, once get proven, I think we will have the development of infrastructure with funding from these DFIs which are being talked of now. So this is a positive, another positive on the economic reforms or the financial sector reforms.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for that. And I think when we're talking about financial sector reforms, you mentioned that there definitely is a position where asset liabilities mismatch at a very higher level, and it creates a lot of NPS as a result of it. And Rajan, sir, this is where we would want to bring you with your insolvency experience over the years. The government has proposed an asset reconstruction company, essentially a generous name for a bad bank, and also an asset management company. So, what are your views on that, and how do you see it helping the Indian economy?
Thank you very much. I would just start by reading a few lines of Honorable Finance Minister's speech. Allow me a moment here. It says, the high level of provisioning by public sector banks of their stressed assets calls for measure to clean up the bank books. An asset reconstruction company limited or asset management company would be set up to consolidate and take over the existing stressed debt and then manage and dispose of the asset to alternate investment funds and other potential investors for eventual value realization. The second point is to further consolidate financial stability capacity of the public sector banks. Further capitalization of rupees 20,000 crore is proposed in 2021-22. That's a part of the budget proposal. Now let me come to the point. Okay. Certainly, if you're talking of an asset reconstruction company or asset management company, in fact, there is a subtle difference between asset reconstruction company and asset management company. I'm treating them as synonymous, though in Indian scenario, there is a slight difference. Because when you are an asset management company, as if you are a general partner who is managing an alternate investment fund, right? That's how it is. Now, what has been the international experience? We should definitely look at it. And if you even do a simple Google search, you will come across the working papers of the World Bank and IMF. Aside from other papers, you would also know the Camco experience where an NPA fund was set up. If you look at Daniela Klingbeil's study, where she could, out of a few dozens of such experiments, the data were available in respect of 7 companies, such, AMCs. And she found that there were 2 types of AMCs. One were for restructuring and others were for rapid asset disposal, right? There were, 3 or 4 of asset disposal companies, 4. In that, even the US was involved when there was an, savings and loan crisis. It was very successful. There was, countries like, I would put it, Ghana, Finland, and the Mexico, Philippines, Spain, and USA. The trust, of course, the USA succeeded well. The others did not really succeed. They limped. And in case of the restructuring AMCs, there were 3, which was Finland, Ghana, and Sweden. Only the Sweden succeeded, right? Why? What were the determinants of success if you look at? One was the type of assets, of course. The Sweden had predominantly the real estate. But let's face it, we in our country in real estate are still suffering. But essentially an excellent ecosystem in the form of a proper institutional mechanism comprising speedy legal adjudication, the process transparency, the speed, and the management efficacy. This is what is seen in both the asset disposal and as well as the restructuring companies. And if you look at Korea, it's exactly the same. What happened in Korea? By 1997 and March 1998, they had 118 trillion won of NPAs. You know the meltdown. And that was 27% of the GDP. 17% of the bank assets. What did they do? They quickly identified that there would be, about 100 million, which will be rapid asset disposal, right? The remaining will be sold off, and eventually, if you look at sold off to the asset NPA fund of Camco, Korea Asset Management Company, and Korea Asset Management Company did pick up 110 trillion worth of debt at an average price of 36% of the book value, and this was funded properly. So the bottom line is that this has to be funded. Even in the other examples which I showed, there has to be funding which is proper, right? Second, the asset disposal AMC, that fund, it did not make big money. Its objective was to resolve. They ended up with a small deficit, but that deficit vis-a-vis the huge value to the economy, there was ample justification for that. Second point is very important, very relevant for India. If you look at any bank worldwide and also in India, a good bank can live with substantially lower than 5% NPAs. But in India, the NPAs of the banks have been consistently very high. Let us not fool ourselves into believing that the NPAs went up only in fiscal 2016. Because if you look at the figures from the RBI website, you would find that in 2015 financial year, the NPA levels were less than 5% average. Suddenly, there was a jump of 93%. I'm talking the gross NPA. It went up by 93, 94% the very next year, 2016. Everyone knows that was because of the asset quality review introduced by the governor at that point of time, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, right? And then the NPA spurted beyond 10%. And do you know, our NPAs in financial year 2019 were better in Asian region, only vis-a-vis Bangladesh by a little amount. Vis-a-vis the European and American peers, we were nowhere. So what am I trying to say? We have a history of churning out NPAs. The government has a history of giving, liberal capitalizations without murmur, without any head rolling, right? And this cannot continue. If you look at internationally, the bad banks, whether you call them as, the restructuring trust corporation or whichever name, their objective was to separate the chaff, remove the chaff from the grain, let the grain then maintain its, purity, and sell the chaff at the best possible, value. That was simply the thing. We are also trying to do that. But unless we also combine the bank reforms, we are going to face the same situation very, very soon. My only point is that it does not help merely to create a bad bank. The bad bank will have to be, resolved, set up in conjunction with the reforms that we're talking about, right? Otherwise, the bad bank will become a perpetual entity. All these entities, whether their lifetime is fixed initially or not, they are wound up. We cannot afford the profligacy of creating incessant NPAs. There will have to be a reform, bank reform. The Honorable Finance Minister talked of privatizing two banks, which I presume means two public sector banks aside from IDBI Bank. I treat IDBI Bank also as a PSB bank because the IDBI banks, the government holding in IDBI Bank was 98.1% at 31st March 2020. And incidentally, I did a small correlation calculation, and I found that the government holding and the bank NPA, there is a high correlation of 0.77, right? So that's an amazing thing. And let's not forget that Dr. P.J. Nayak committee report, the name of the committee report was slightly different. In May 2014, had lamented about the deeply negative returns of the government as a shareholder in banks and had recommended its exit. So if the Honorable Minister wants to exit from two banks, including IDBI Bank, by all means do it, but first reform that will enhance the value and you will realize more. Let us not sell anywhere which goes at a distress value. The potential is great. And I'm afraid I will not like to. Anand ji has already mentioned about the development financial institutions. We should not forget what happened to our development financial institutions in past. They failed because of several reasons, including a huge moral hazard. Our institutions suffer from moral hazard, and moral hazard happens when I can get away with murder. The government ownership induces moral hazard because from the top to bottom, nobody has any stake and they run away. And the good thing is that the Dr. PJ Nayak committee report has in fact solution for that. Give incentives like ESOPs with proper vesting schedules and clawback provisions so that if I am the head of the institution, I will work for the best interest because my equity will come to me later once I'm proven that I didn't create any bad blood. Whereas today, what happens? One chairman comes, cleanses the debris of the previous, of course, now the MD and CEO. Then the new fellow creates a debris which the next one does it. The country cannot afford this. So I'll conclude by saying that bad banks is the need. You cannot have any bank to be mired with distress asset resolution. And let's remind ourselves that if we do not learn from mistakes, we are destined to repeat with more intensity. The country cannot afford. Let not the same mistakes occur. Whether we are setting bad bank or we are setting a DFI, let there be an affirmative statement that there is going to be no moral hazard. By all means, have EB, bad bank, call it whatever, AMC. But have transparency, have bank reforms, and ensure that the legislations for the recovery must be very efficient. Charge more, create a cadre of members, make the timelines mandatory, create incentives for the members. Insolvency and bankruptcy code is a brilliant legislation with mandatory timelines, but they are breached enormously. Even for admission today, you have to wait for 1 year sometimes.
Right.
So do that and then see how things take off from.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. So thank you so much, Anand sir, and thank you so much, Rajan sir, for joining us. Today we have discussed on a lot of issues, and one of the things that I definitely understand what we have discussed is we have not only discussed about what is written in letter, but we also discussed the challenges that emanate out of it. And I think understanding it in the context of Indian economy did help me, and we believe that it will help our viewers. Thank you so much again for joining us. This was our episode. Please subscribe to our channel, viewers, and we'll bring more conversations. Thank you so much, everyone.
Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for latest updates.